Welcome to Everything All Right, the literary talk. My guest today is the fabulous Philippa East for the first show of the year, the master of psychological suspense, whose new novel, A Guilty Secret, is out now, and it's simply fantastic. Welcome, Philippa.
Hi, Ellen. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, you're most welcome. Thank you for joining us. Tell us a little bit more about A Guilty Secret, if you can. No spoilers.
Yeah, okay. So, A Guilty Secret, which looks like this, if you spot it on Amazon or in a bookshop somewhere, this is what you're looking for. So this is my fourth novel with HQ HarperCollins, and basically this one is about a remote Scottish boarding school, a group of teenagers getting up to no good in the woods, the bizarre death of a beloved psychotherapist, and two estranged ex-spouses thrown together to investigate the creepy connections between all of these different events. So this book is set in Scotland, which is where I'm from originally. So I just had a great time writing it. It was just really fun going back to my roots and yeah, having fun, particularly with the setting in this book.
What a fantastic elevator pitch. It gives me like goosebumps. I love remote boarding schools. That sounds it sounds really, really intriguing. You work also as a clinical psychologist, so is it obsolete to ask what inspires your stories?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a huge crossover for me between my psychology work and my writing. I think both of them scratch this itch that I have to understand people and understand what makes us tick as human beings, to understand myself, to understand relationships, to understand trauma, all of these things. So my sort of training and my work as a psychologist informs my writing, but I think kind of learning about thinking about the journeys that characters go on in stories as well, things like the hero's journey is a classic example. That's been really interesting for me as well, to think about how that really mirrors the journeys that my clients go on in therapy as well, and things like they come to therapy because they've had an inciting incident in their life that has turned it upside down a lot of the time, and they'll have an all is lost moment at some point, but hopefully they'll have their death and rebirth. And yeah, so I love those overlaps. It's all part and parcel of the same thing for me.
Yes, I love the analytical take on writing that you have, and I can only recommend anybody who watches to visit Philippa's Twitter and actually see the threads she posts about writing and the different stages a good novel must have. I actually have learned. I've learned what I'm doing, Philippa, thanks to you. What I did intuitively, and I can now give it a name, and that is fantastic. And that actually leads me to my next question, because you sort of, you come across as so switched on and passionate about this. So let's go way back. How did you get into writing?
Do you know what? It's not something that was on my radar as, something to do. It's certainly not as a job. Really, ever until I was in my kind of 30s, really. So I loved books as a kid. I grew up without a TV in the 80s and early 90s, which was very unusual not to have a TV then, but my parents were slightly alternative. And anyway, so my sister and I, we used to just go to the library and read. That was just what we did the whole time. And I always loved stories, reading books. I wrote a little bit and stuff at school, like most people do, but then it just wasn't on my radar as something to pursue. Pretty much everyone in my family does fairly mainstream jobs. My mum was a nurse, my dad was an accountant, my sister is a lawyer, so I became a psychologist. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of like I just did, a proper job.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I was in my 30s that I picked up creative writing again, really just as a creative hobby, just something to dabble with. But of all the creative things that I tried over the years, it was the one that I've completely felt at home in from the get-go. I tried other things like, I don't know, photography or pottery, and I just was a bit shit at them, to be honest, and it wasn't my thing. I mean, I was like, I wanted to be good at them, but I just wasn't. But yeah, so it was something that I came to pretty late in the day, and just loved so much that I kept doing it. and then started getting short stories published. And that's when I thought that maybe I should take it more seriously.
And so taking it seriously normally involves getting an agent here in the UK, which is an absolutely soul-crushing exercise. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you found your agent? Because that's always a big, big question for any nascent novelist.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you say, Ellen, I think it's, there's usually a lot of rejection and failure along the way before we hit that success of getting an agent and then hopefully ultimately getting a publishing deal. For me, I think that most of that failure and rejection happened when I was, as I say, writing short stories. So I spent probably about 8 years writing really just short stories and submitting them to magazines, to journals, to competitions, and getting loads and loads and loads of rejections and working on my writing during that time. And so I think when other authors may have written 2 or 3 novels and maybe gone out on submission with them and had rejection or had multiple rounds of rejections with their debut, that all happened for me in the short story writing. And after about 8 years, I was like, maybe it's time to try a novel. Although I had tried one a way back, and that was when I first got into writing as an adult. And I really enjoyed it, but it was really bad. So no, I never did anything with that novel. But yeah, after about 8 years of writing short stories, I began working on what ultimately became my debut, Little White Lies. And I actually met my agent through the Jericho Writers Festival. I had a one-to-one with her, and she requested the full manuscript. And basically what actually happened is, off the back of reading the full manuscript, she basically suggested what would I now understand would be a revise and resubmit. So she had major revisions that she was suggesting. Specifically, initially Little White Lies was written more as a sort of literary coming of age story from the perspective of Jess, who is the teenage cousin of Abigail, who is the missing girl who gets found and comes home. And Sarah had 2 suggestions. One was to write it in dual point of view with an adult perspective to make it more of a to make it more adult in general,
or marketable.
Yeah, marketable and not kind of blurring into YA. And also she said, it feels like the premise, missing child is found and comes home, secrets come to light, feels like a thriller premise. So you need a really big twist. And I didn't have a really big twist, but I just needed to think of one, and then maybe she'd take me on. So that was very stressful because I was so close, but I needed to do this huge rewrite. But long story short, I did manage to do it after coming close to a bit of a nervous breakdown. And then she liked how I'd reworked the manuscript, and then she offered representation. So and I had sent out to other agents, and they hadn't. She was the only one who offered me representation.
And she's a fantastic agent, so well done you. And you must have learned so much, because Psychological Suspense is sort of known for fiendish plotting and twists. And do you find it easier now with is it your 4th book that's coming out?
Yeah, so A Guilty Secret is my 4th, and I'm working on my 5th now as well, of course, because we're always writing. Oh, well, I am anyway. Does it get easier? Yeah, I think in some ways it has, in the sense that I know, but like you say, I know much more now what I need to be aiming for in what I'm trying to create, to have a much more of a sense of, like I think I'm, as I say, with Little White Lies, when I first started writing it, it was missing all of those thriller elements, and I had to kind of figure out how to put them in. Same with my second book, Safe and Sound, that had the potential to be quite a quiet book, and again I had to work quite hard on making sure it had plenty of suspense and twists and so on. So I mean, my plots always take a long time to come together, because like you say, in a thriller they are quite intricate, and often I think sometimes readers think that we just start at the beginning and like have all these red herrings that all magically come together at the end. No, we kind of bumble our way to the end and it's like a complete car crash, and then we go back and like fill the bits in to make it make sense.
I mean, thank God one writes on a PC. Would you imagine writing like Dostoevsky by hand, your manuscript? And like, I remember speaking to Patrick Galliot, who still writes by hand. It's absolutely fascinating how prepared he must be. So do you have any idols who inspires your writing? Who's your favorite writer?
Yeah, I mean, I know it may sound a bit cliche now, but my very original inspiration was Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn. I think of that as the masterwork of the contemporary psychological thriller genre. Yes, there was people, Daphne du Maurier had written what we would probably now think of as psychological thrillers or domestic noir, but I think when that book came on the scene, it started a huge trend. And I don't know if you'll remember, but initially psychological thrillers were conceptualized as a trend, and there was always talk about, oh, it's going to die out, people are going to move on. But now I think people recognize it as a genre, and as established genre that isn't going anywhere. So when I read Gone Girl, I think, because I hadn't really found a contemporary genre that I enjoyed before that. So I'm sorry, I'm going to have to say this, Ellen. I wasn't that into historical fiction, although I'm sure I know your books are brilliant. Right, I know yours are brilliant. So yours are the exception for me.
Thank you. Thank you, Nick.
Get the Tsarina series.
I haven't heard about it yet.
Yeah, but I wasn't really into historical fiction. I wasn't into romance. I wasn't into straight crime. I wasn't into sci-fi. I wasn't into fantasy. So I really just read a lot of literary fiction and that sort of thing. And then when I read Gone Girl, I felt like it had all the things I like in literary fiction, and the writing was very sophisticated. The themes were incredibly sophisticated, but it was a complete page turner. And then I read a lot of psychological thrillers off the back of that, and I just thought, this is the vehicle for me, because I'm a psychologist, as we talked about, which means I want to understand psychological stuff. And yes, also I'm a clinical psychologist, which is really focusing on when psychology goes a bit wrong and people need help with their mental health or their psychology. So I've always been drawn to kind of the dark side, to tension, to conflict, to trauma, to guilt, to secrets, all of this kind of stuff. So I was like, yeah, so Gillian Flynn, other authors that I love, Megan Abbott, again, she's a psychological thriller writer, Laura Lippman, who's a bit more sort of literary in her style. They're people that I love, Fiona Cummins, Nikki Smith, Lauren North.
So
many.
Yeah, I mean, with all that reading and all that background research, no wonder that your books are so captivating. So what is your tip or your top tip for nascent novelists, for starting writers?
So I always say, if you want to be a published author, then basically research your field. And I think of that in like 4 ways. One is read books, right? Read what's getting published now, read contemporary fiction on the market today, so that you have a good sense of, what books readers are reading. And it's going to be quite hard to write a book that is marketable and publishable if you're not kind of aware of what's on the market and where the gaps in the market are. So read, which is like, that's not a hard thing, right? That's fun. So read, get feedback on your work. So no writer, even the top writers who have been published for a long time, still need editors and still need people to cast an eye over what they're writing, just because it's very hard to judge how your words on the page are landing with the reader. We're trying to create a kind of sort of like, what's the word? Like getting the reader to read our minds through what's on the page, a sort of, mind reading thing. And like, we can't tell very easily ourselves if that's working. So get feedback on your work, get robust feedback and use it. So that would be number 2. Number 3 is learn your craft, study your craft. So yeah, read threads on Twitter, read articles online, get a how to write book, go on a free course, listen to podcasts. Don't assume that. Sometimes people shy away saying like, oh, I don't want to follow the rules, or I just just write whatever comes into my head. And it's not about following the rules. It's about the same way as, you know, in dance, there's certain techniques that will mean that you are more able to do the moves. Or in art, if you learn about perspective, you'll paint better pictures than if you don't understand that. So learn the techniques, because they'll help you communicate your story most effectively to the reader. So become, you know, research that, become an expert in that as much as you can. And the last thing in this whole kind of research the field and become as knowledgeable as you can in the field is research the publishing industry. So again, listen to podcasts, read articles online, you know, follow agents and editors on Twitter, understand how to write a submission package, follow the guidelines on that. Don't, the same way as if you were applying for a job in any industry, your chances of getting a job are going to be much, much higher if you've researched the industry you're applying to work in and you have a sort of basic understanding of how things work and what's expected of you.
So there, Philippa summed it up. It's a full-time job.
Yeah.
Being a beginning writer. What is next for you? Very quickly, a little sort of sneak peek in your 5th book.
So what's next? So in the very, very short term, I'm having a launch party for A Guilty Secret.
Okay.
Next Wednesday. So anyone, well, I don't know if this will be going out before then.
No.
Okay. Well, anyway,
your launch party was fantastic, and I absolutely loved it.
My launch party was fantastic.
You can tell me about it later.
So I'll just say I'm having various events to launch A Guilty Secret. So if you have a look on my Twitter page or my Facebook page, you'll find I'll always post things about upcoming events. So if you want to come and join any of them, you're always more than welcome. So yeah, that, you know, you can come and say hello and join in. In the medium term, I'm working on my 5th book. All being well, fingers crossed, that should be out, you know, maybe sometime in 2025. So next year sometime. And that book is a bit of a destination thriller. And I've described it, it's set in Fiji, and I've described it as Lucy Clark's The Castaways meets HBO's cult series The Vow. So yeah, watch this space for that one.
This is fantastic. And Fiji actually matches our last point, which are the famous 5 faves, but you're forgiven if you haven't heard about them yet. So very, very snappy. Tell me, what's your favorite movie?
Dirty Dancing.
Okay.
It's a great movie.
Favorite book?
Gone Girl, or going to be a bit pompous here, Lawrence Durrell's The Alexandria Quartet.
Favorite music or score, song?
Oh, well, I'm a massive Abba fan, so if you put Abba on for me, I'm happy. Yeah.
Okay. Your favorite food?
Pasta, specifically spaghetti.
And your favorite travel destination?
My bed with a book. I'm a total homebody. I just like being at home with a book on the sofa. Yeah.
Is that the JOMO, the joy of missing out?
Yeah, the joy of missing out. The joy of being like, no, I'm not coming out. Sorry.
And I love that. Okay, well, thanks so much for joining us. Thank you for watching Everything All Right. My guest today was Philippa East, and we talked about her current book, A Guilty Secret. Order it online, or better still, get it at your local independent bookstore. There it is again, just in case you haven't seen it yet. I am Alpsten. Subscribe to Everything All Right and watch us next week. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Helen.